also the daughter of two survivors of the Holodomor, which I think drives her work in this field. Just last year, Pani Valentina organized the second National Holodomor Education Conference in Winnipeg at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, which we, as UCC, co-sponsored. She's been honored for her work many times by such medals as the Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Medal. Tonight, most recently, she was awarded the Святей Володимир Medal by the Світовий Конгрес Українців.
Слова на мою адресу. Хочу подякувати всім, які були згадані, бо я всіх вже не буду пам'ятати. Я знаю, що тут треба було класний час, щоб організувати сьогоднішній вечір, і я вам дуже вдячна. Моя книжка називається, це нова книжка Holodomor in Ukraine, The Genocidal Famine 1932-1933, Learning Materials for Teachers and Students. I would like to thank the organizers, as I said, that organized this evening. They asked me to say a few words in Ukrainian, but basically to speak in English. The book is written in English. So unless there is someone who doesn't understand English, please permit me to do the speaking in English. The topic of the Holodomor, the Ukrainian genocide, has played a significant role in my life, and one that has influenced me from early childhood as a horrendous tragedy that I knew about even as a young child growing up in a refugee camp in post-war Germany. The feeling of the injustice of it all has stayed with me. In my eyes, the Holodomor serves as an example of what will happen when governments are not confronted with their crimes by the world community and get away with them for decades. Today, many of us see Ukraine once more being confronted by acts of aggression by the same aggressor with a different name, who continues to defy the world order and is getting away with it once more. Therefore, I feel that it is important that we teach Canadian students about this genocide, the Holodomor, so that they can learn to be empowered to stand up against escalating acts of violence, acts of intolerance and hate, and to develop the democratic values of tolerance, inclusiveness, human rights, equity, and the universal right to life, food, and shelter. These values foster a sense of civil responsibility in students, which most powerfully counter the spread of totalitarianism and dictatorships. I think the Holodomor is an event that needs to be commemorated and studied by the world community, not just by Ukrainians. Not only to honor those who died, but also to tell the story of the survivors and their great courage and resilience. A positive story in that. They were the ones who dared to survive, and their offspring today still feel the after effects of this genocide. Today, it is they who are some of the people who are building our communities in Canada and in Ukraine, creating a society based on democratic principles. So to better understand what actually motivated me to write the book about the genocide, I would like to show you a video clip from a longer interview that I did that may be found in the Ukrainian Canadian Research and Documentation Centre in Toronto as part of their oral history collection. I could retire. I found out that I could retire with the number of years I had taught and so forth. So I said, this is it for me. But I continued to run libraries for them, like for half a year as a teacher, retired teacher, because You need special skills to run libraries, and I had my library papers. And I also, that's the time when I decided that I had to do something about Holodomor. I did workshops prior to that on Holodomor and on internment of World War I. And it just came out that the Toronto District School Board was introducing a genocide course, and they were not including the Holodomor. And I was part and parcel of that board, and I was upset. So I had to stay in the back for a while because it was a conflict of interest until I resigned. And then when I did resign, I came out and I talked to Cook, to the Ukrainian Congress, that we had to do something about this. And so I got involved in working on getting the Holodomor into the curriculum in Ontario.
So you started doing that in the 80s?
I did, the first time I did a workshop on the Holodomor was in the 80s, yes, with Horace Attendee, by the way, who was teaching at York University. They were doing a half day on the Holocaust. And then because I talked about it with my colleagues, one of them suggested, said, Valentina, why don't you do it on your Ukrainian genocide? So we did. And I called Horace to come in, and he did an hour lecture on the history of Ukraine, giving the information. And I did the teacher thing, where it fits into our curriculum, and why it should be taught, and how it should be taught. So we did this, and that was a good thing. So that was then. And then after that, we set up a special committee got all professional people, a trustee, a principal who was teaching the principal's course at Boise. Myself was a specialist in history. We had parents, we came in and we knew what we were doing. And I think that would shock the TDSB a little bit. And they did pass a resolution that they were going to have a special Memorial Day for us, and they actually had two of their staff members produce 2 units study, and I was the consultant. I helped them. I provided all the materials, etc. And so it started, and then I realized that it wasn't enough just to do it in Ontario. You have to go across the country. And so I convinced Coop that we shouldn't just have an awareness committee on the Holodomor. We need an education committee, and I was prepared to be the chair. And so that's what I'm still doing now. And that helped, because there were people in other provinces that had already started this as well. But you need coordination. So I helped to coordinate these things so that we could share our resources and we could do things. So out of all that, the Holodomor Research and Education Consortium was born. I had been talking about having a center, a permanent location, not just a committee of volunteers, that we needed a solid base for something like this to continue so that it could be there after I'm done, after I'm finished, that someone could be hired to continue this work. And my good friend, Jim Timothy, who has sponsored many good projects, phoned me one day and said, I guess I should be doing something, shouldn't I? I never asked him for money. But anyway, so this he decided to sponsor, and that was good, because now we have a research arm and we have an education arm. And so since then, there have been 2 conferences that I've organized, one in 2013 in Toronto, and we just finished a very successful conference on Holodomor education at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights in Winnipeg, with 120 attendees. And what was unique about it was that we had academics, so we had 2 academics who were the keynote speakers. And then we had faculty of education staff who actually teach teachers how to teach about methodologies. They came from the University of Manitoba and from the University of Winnipeg and took part in our discussions and took part in our panels and so forth. And then we had over 90 teachers from across Canada, from different grade levels. And I would say about 60% of them were non-Ukrainians, which for me was a blessing, because finally we are getting into the mainstream, and it was extremely important. And from all that, over the last 10 years, I've been working on a workbook, which I hope is going to be published this year. It's called the Genocide, the Holodomor in Ukraine, the Genocide of Famine, 1932-33, learning materials, learning activities for teachers and students. And it's about 300 pages, and it has everything a teacher needs in order to be able to teach it. At least I think so. I tried to think, if I were doing this, I didn't know anything about it, what is it that I would need? So you have materials that you can hand out to kids. You have lesson plans that they could use, and that makes it very important that it gets published. And during the conference, I handed out a small little booklet that comes out of this book, which is the booklet that is going to be published. It's just going through its last edit. So teachers came up to me and they said, this is exactly why we came to this conference. We need materials. And so I think that's very important. And I know myself, when if I teach something, if I don't have time to look for materials, I will not teach it. So this is going to be a blessing, I hope. Are there any questions related to that little interview? Something you didn't quite understand, or?
I understood. I just wanted to add that in the 1980s, here in Ottawa, Pani Thorpe, Simarenko, she's related to the man who did the apples, Ukrainian, forget her first name, and Pan Krivoruchko and I took part in the Ottawa Board of Education, pushing that. Then after a while, I dropped out, and I don't know what happened. Did you pick up on that? Is that how it got through all of Ontario? Or what?
No, I didn't know anything about it. We started doing this because of the Toronto District School Board. The Toronto District School Board is very specific. It's the 4th largest school board in North America, and the largest one in Canada, and a very difficult nut to crack. I worked for them, so I know very well how they function. And they had this, they were thinking of a genocide course, and I was going to a PD day, like any teacher looking at the program, and we're interested in getting a genocide course. I said, well, then I'm going to attend it. So I went, and there were all kinds of questions, what we're going to be teaching. They were teaching 3 genocides. Armenian, Holocaust, and Rwanda. So I stood up and I asked, I said, why aren't you doing the Holodomor? And some teacher got up, he said, you can't compare the Holodomor with the Holocaust or anything else. After all, the Ukrainians did it to themselves. Oh, that's right. That's the kind of stuff that was going on. And they were not interested. So I talked to Coop, we talked about it. We did an appeal to change it. That's what I was saying, that I had a trustee, a principal, myself. They said they didn't have enough time in the curriculum to teach it. I said in 110 hours, I know the education system, there are 110 hours. I said in 110 hours, I can teach the ancient history course. It starts from the beginning of mankind to the end of the Renaissance. And you tell me you can't teach more than 3 genocides? I mean, who are they talking to? Really. So basically, that's how it started. And we actually had, when we had the appeal, we had a demonstration in front of the school board, and it ended up in the newspapers. And my vice principal says to me, Valentina, how come the Ukrainians were demonstrating? I said, because there's a little bit of injustice in here. There's no equity. And she said, but it was so quick, how did they do it? I said, oh, we can demonstrate in the we're almost professionals at it. We've had the Soviet Union to deal with. So anyways, this is how it started. So they gave us a concession. They gave us 2, as I mentioned, 2 units of study for the grade 12 course, the history and the politics course. And I was the consultant. I gave them the materials and they did their own thing. And it wasn't bad, it was good. At least it was something that was there. And they gave us the Holodomor Memorial Day. So when that board had the Holodomor Memorial Day, that's like a springboard for me. After that, I can go to any school board across Canada and suggest that they do it. Do you understand? That's very, very important. So that was good, that's how it started. But it was a hard nut to crack. And then the next thing that we had to do was, there was a curriculum review in Ontario. That means that they're changing the curriculum. They do this every 10, 15 years. And we just happened to have it at that time. So we went to see the review committee. We wrote reports. I don't know how many reports I had to write. Attend meetings. make suggestions. And there was a lot of opposition. And it came from teachers, it came from all kinds of groups. But in the end, we did a lot of lobbying. And in Ontario, it's in the curriculum. In 12 or 13 courses, it's not, I shouldn't say in the curriculum. Today, it doesn't get mentioned what has to be specifically taught. It has to come within the confines of a concept. And I identified it in 13 courses. And I have a teacher who has identified the actual links in the curriculum, and teachers can simply pick, that's on our website. They can pick it up and they can see where they can apply it, the Holodomor, and they can teach it with some suggestions. So that is it's something that is made easy for teachers. And that's the way we have to do things. Because teachers will not teach something if they don't know anything about it. And if it becomes difficult and they don't know where to go, they won't do it either. So that's been the nut that we had to crack too. And that means teaching teachers and doing workshops and things like that. And having teaching materials. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. We go.
Perhaps
When you said that they can find it and they can teach it, but is there an obligation of any kind of obligation, or is it all voluntary?
Well, in some courses, they have a choice. For example, what they do is when they write about teaching about human rights abuses and genocide, they will put the names of the genocides that they're recommending, and that's what I was after. I wanted that to have the Holodomor. And it's in a number of courses. Half of the courses that I mentioned, there are 12 courses, half of them have it mentioned, and half of them don't. But it applies. There's a social justice course in Ontario now. Social justice. And they didn't put it in. I mean, that's almost criminal. You know, how could you avoid a topic like this? So I put it in. And I handed it to the Ministry of Education. I said, you missed something. I said, maybe you could correct this in your next little version. I said, but this is really serious. You know, what did help that, Canada recognized the Holodomor, right? 2008. And this is around that time. This is when they brought in the new course. In 2008, we have the genocide course coming to the Toronto board. Then after that, it mushroomed in other boards. All you need is one board to start. And then the recognition. So that should have been a signal for a lot of them that this is time maybe to do this, right? How many genocides have been recognized by the Canadian government? Anybody know?
6.
5.
5. That's right. Yeah, 5.
Don't ask me to name them.
That's Armenian, the Holodomor, the Holocaust, the Bosnian, and Rwanda.
What about what's going on in Iran? It's not recognized yet?
Well, not officially by the government. I'm talking about officially. It means that they pass a resolution in Parliament saying that this is what Canada recognizes it. And when they do that, then we have an opportunity to go and ask them to teach it if you recognize it. But who is in charge of education? Which government? Provincial. So the federal government gives you your concepts, and and then the provinces are to sort of follow suit. And then, so how many provinces have recognized the Holodomor as a genocide? Anybody know?
Well, not BC.
Not BC yet. No, we're working on that. And he's working on that. Right. Through Cook. But how many have?
3, 4,
A little more. 5. So we have Ontario. We have, next to Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan. That's right. And East Quebec. On all by unanimous decision of their assemblies or legislature, right? When they recognize it, we now have an opportunity to visit the Ministry of Education and ask them how come, since it's been recognized by your government, you don't have anything there. You know, so it's like a step. It's difficult to go when there's nothing there, but you can use this. And I think it really helped that the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, you probably, how many of you are familiar with the problems we had with them? Some of, yeah. But the compromise was that they were going to at least have in that gallery where they were going to have 99 genocides or something. I remember going to the meetings and hearing about this. And then they were going to recycle, you know, do different ones. They actually have a gallery now of the 5 genocides that have been recognized by Canada. And we're one of them. So we did get some concessions from that. And they have gone out of their way since then. They gave me the location for the conference, which was $7,000 rent, gratis. I asked for it. I did ask for it. And I got it. Now, the Ukrainian Teachers Association is preparing to have their Ukrainian conference at the museum as well. I never asked them whether they got it for free or they're paying for it. I have no idea. I will ask Oksana. She will tell me. But anyway, but the point is that now they're willing. And there's a new CEO there, John Young, who is wonderful. And he told me he has a Ukrainian Baba, and he comes from Vegreville. So which makes a big difference. And he was in Kuryliw this year, invited to speak at the 85th conference that was held in Kuryliw on the Holodomor, where I was as well. So it's interesting how things change. But it took 10 years almost to get this kind of reception. So it takes time, and you have to break down walls. But you have to do it in a professional way, right, Georg?
Always professional.
Always professional.
And there's also a theme here.
Pardon?
Perhaps we could go on, not with questions, but
Yeah,
questions at the
yeah.
end.
That's right. So this is basically what has been told to you already. Next, thank you. So what has been done to date? So basically when I'm looking at what's been done in education, I'm strictly talking about education. It's been done by the Holodomor Education Committee, which we mentioned, that's part of COOP. From 2008 until the present day, I'm the chair, and we have committees in every province of the ones that are working with us. We still don't have, we have a committee in British Columbia too, and Quebec have been approached yet. I have to have French materials, but the Maritimes have been approached at it. We just don't have the time to get to them. But there are committees of volunteers who are working on this. And of course, Quebec Education is an educational institution. It's a project of the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies at the University of Alberta. That's the one funded by Jim Timerte. And he's been doing that since 2013. And it has 2 arms. This, I think, would be interesting for you to hear. There's a research arm, which means the academics can translate Ukrainian books into English so that more scholars will get information. And they hold conferences, attend conference, but this is all on the academic level. And the second arm is education, and I'm the chair of that. I'm the director of that. So I go out and do a lot of these things about education that you've heard about with a group of people. I have 2 assistants who are paid to do that at the moment, which is great, because you cannot survive just on volunteerism. You have to be able to do things beyond that. Next, the mandate of Hrek education. What is it that we want to do? So basically, the main things we want to do, promotion, you can see all the various, I have 6 components to what we do. Promotion, so it's awareness and recognition of the Holodomor. As we talked about its recognition, very important that people realize that Canada has done this. And I think it's, you know, the fact that we're one of the 5 has made a difference in everything that we're doing. Next, we have workshops. Sorry, I'm just going to talk about each one of these. Workshops, seminars, and conferences. We've already mentioned the conferences that I've organized on education specifically. And we have seminars going as well, and workshops. And these are training workshops for teachers on how to teach the Holodomor, both content and methodology and how to do it. So this is very important. And where would you do that? At professional development days. For example, I'm going to Saskatchewan in October, to Moose Jaw, of all places. They're going to have a Saskatchewan Social Studies Teachers Association, and they have asked me to be the keynote speaker for that. And they're going to be getting my book. Every person who attends that is going to get my book as one of the gifts for by the association. And I think that's wonderful. So these are professional teachers. Now, I've done quite a few workshops. Some of them are at the faculties of education, like I did that in Fresno, California. I did that in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Did it in Manitoba. And I've done workshops in other associations across the country. The other thing I wanted to mention is I have been working with Ukraine. It was already mentioned that we're doing this. Since 2016, we have an affiliate organization of HREC, which is called HREC in Ukraine. And we are doing workshops for teachers there. I do a master class for teachers. And since 2016, it was in Kyiv several times, Bila Tsarkva, Zhytomyr, and there have been 2 summer schools, 2 weeks each, at Chornomorsk and Odessa Oblast that we run specifically on how to teach Holodomor. And that has been very successful. And that's because we signed an agreement with Lilia Hranevich, who is the Minister of Education. And she supports this. She was thrilled. And she's all for it. You know, she established the Nova Ukrainska Shkola in Ukraine. She's making great reforms. And I would say she's the first Minister of Education that I think knows what she's doing. That's my personal opinion. And my thoughts are very similar to hers. So basically, that's what that is. Now, development of teaching materials. Very important. And this book took me 10 years to complete. I started collecting things. I was handing out drafts, but eventually it had to become into a book, something solid that could be available. So that's one of the things. The other thing for developing of materials, I created the lesson on the bus, as was mentioned. That lesson, which I call the historian's craft, has received 3 awards for its immersive learning experience, as was mentioned. So the content, the methodology, and the technology together created that kind of lesson. So this is something special too. And one of the things that we're trying to do, you can show the next slide. We have a HREC Education Prize, an award for teachers who create a lesson, and if it's in the top five categories, we will give them $1,000 for a lesson that we're going to put on our website. I'm trying to create a database of lessons on the Holodomor at different grade levels that are innovative, that teachers can share with others and get credit for doing it. How many teachers can have their work put onto a website like that? So we're going to be doing that, and it's already, our 3 top winners from last year, their lessons are up there already, and the top one was in non-Ukrainian, which is okay. Thank God other people are starting to get interested in the Holodomor, prawda? There were others that were Ukrainian. One was sort of half and half, French-Canadian name, but she sounds as if she could be Ukrainian too, so I don't know, from the West. Could we go back for a minute? And of course, consulting is another thing, very important. I've had people, call up and ask for me to help them to do things. I did that with the Toronto District School Board for the 2 units. The Canadian Museum for Human Rights set up a special lesson on the Holodomor. They called me, they actually paid my way for 6 months, once a month, to come in and consult, you know, which was great. But, I had to set them straight on what the 5 stalks of grain were. Do you know the pamphlet that stands? There are 2 of them in Winnipeg. One is outside in the legislature and one is inside the museum. So the person who was doing the tour when we were there said, well, these are the 5 stalks of grain. Yes, okay, so what was it for? It's to represent the 5-year plan. Well, I almost died. I said to myself, and who taught you that? And she says, well, it's obvious. So I went to the second in command and I said, do you want the Ukrainians outside protesting against what you've been doing? I said, you can't do this. I said, that's wrong. He says, what should it be? So they changed it, I hope. I haven't gone back for a tour. But if you go, make sure you ask them, how come the 5 stalks of grain are there? So that you could figure it out. No, seriously. You see how people misrepresent. They don't think of what it means. So little things like that we have to change.
So what does it mean?
But what does it mean?
No, it does. What it means is there's a law that was passed on August the 7th, 1932, called the destruction and pilfering of socialist property. And it's about if you go into a field, because all property was taken over by the government, all the farms, all the farmland was taken away. So they became socialist fields of the government. So it could have been your farm, but you no longer have the right to go there and take even a stalk of grain. And the punishment for that was 10 years in prison, or you could be shot on the spot, even children. So that's for the Ukrainians, this is the most significant law that we consider. All you have to do is give the kids the kind of, you know, the excerpts of that and let them think about that law. What does this mean to us? And so you can't make a mistake by saying it's a 5-year plan, right? I mean, really.
So where does the
But
5
why
come from?
5?
Pardon?
Why 5 stocks instead of 4 or 7?
I don't know. That's the way it is.
I think that was the law. It said it.
Yeah, but I think that it said so, yeah.
5
I think
stocks.
so. But it's, you know, it's just an idea. It doesn't have to be a large amount. Because can you make a bread with 5 stalks of grain? No. But it's the idea.
I always.
I think there was a reference to exactly like 5 stocks in the law.
In the law.
Yeah, that is why it was nicknamed the law of 5 stocks. Because
Right.
if you would steal more than 5 stocks from the socialist field, then you would be prosecuted.
Be
But,
prosecuted.
yeah, that is why it was nicknamed that way.
Yeah.
So was that a law just for Ukrainians or was it for Russia and Belarus?
For the whole Soviet Union.
It's the whole Soviet Union.
The whole Soviet.
But it seemed to have been really enforced in Ukraine. Yeah, I don't know, I couldn't tell you about the rest of the Soviet Union, but I know that in Ukraine it was a very serious thing. Okay, so consulting is very important too, and I've had people call from Boston, Massachusetts. They're trying to get the Holodomor into the curriculum, and they didn't have materials, so then they ask, and I give them readily. You know, this is something we have to share, because we have to get it into the curriculum, everywhere that we can possibly do. And another one is lobbying. Another thing. Academics don't go lobbying usually, as far as I know, but we have to. Educators have to, because you have to push. And I know that the fact that I wear 2 hats with Cook, where I can walk in and say I have 1,300,000 Ukrainians behind me with this request is very important, right? Very important. And I think we have to understand that. And we can lobby individual politicians in our areas. We can ask them to do things. And it comes in very well. And Ivan Baker, who was one of my former students, who is now, well, he's going to be running for the federal government now. He went with me to visit the Ministry of Education in Toronto when he was an MLA. So that was very important. And presentations. You have to do presentations, right? You have to go into schools. You can be a guest speaker. You can get other people to go into schools. You have to make it readily available so that we can do presentations for classes. And that is a big part. We're trying to set up a list of people who are be able to do it, go in with the PowerPoint and so forth. So that's what we've been doing in a nutshell. And it's not everything. There is a sheet over there if you're interested. It has a lot of the stuff about our mandate. Next. Okay, we can continue. So motivation for writing the Holodomor in Ukraine, the book. Why teach it and write about it? We all know about this, right? The Holodomor was denied by whom? The Soviets. A lot of intellectuals, left-wing intellectuals in Canada and the United States and the Western world, they didn't want to believe that this kind of thing could happen in this socialist utopia, right? Covered up by whom? By a lot of journalists, right? Walter Duranty as one, and there were others like that. So we have to consider that, and ignored by Western governments. They knew about it, but they weren't going to do anything. They didn't confront the Soviets. They didn't put sanctions against Soviets. Canada was selling machinery for industrialization in the Soviet Union. Big business was working well. So that's very important. And that was for over 5 decades. And so that's considerable. Okay, next. What was required to teach it? Well, first of all, awareness. You know, the first thing we had to do was even make people believe that it had actually happened. That's unbelievable, isn't it, when we think about it now? But we had to push and say it was a genocide. And the fact, you know, the word itself, I was told, don't put the word Holodomor out there, Vanya. What are you doing? I said, why? And they said, they're not going to understand it, and you're going to lose everything. Today, they know what it is. Just like the Holocaust. It took years. It took them a lot of years to do it. So awareness is extremely important to bring it forth. And then, of course, once you're informing people and educating them about it, some form of action. So what are you going to do? Workshops, preparation of materials, etc. Education materials. Next. Approach. My approach is, I would say, the kind of approach you would have in the Western world. Canada is very concerned about children learning about human rights. This is part of our democratic values. And so one of the best ways to approach the teaching of the Holodomor is through human rights. And I was very fortunate that I met a professor from New York City University, Joyce Apsel, who asked me when I started doing all this, she says, Valentina, are you teaching it through the history, trying to get it into the curriculum through history? I said, well, that's what I do. I'm a history specialist. She says, try human rights. Because it's in the curriculum to teach human rights from kindergarten. And it's a common concept. It's in all kinds of courses. And if you bring in examples of case studies like the Holodomor, you could include it in so many more courses, and it can be taught. Because history courses today are optional. They're social studies. You can do all kinds of other things, so we have to make sure that we take a multidisciplinary approach to it so that you can teach it in a variety of courses and apply it. So that's very important. And of course, the other thing is democratic values. Very important. And one of the values is the right to life. Recently, the UN passed a resolution on the rights of the child to life, food, shelter, right? Anybody can teach something like that about the Holodomor. What do you think these kids, what life of these kids were like, right? I mean, a good teacher can do things. So that's very important. And we are always, another thing that the federal government has come out with as one of our obligations as teachers is to teach responsible citizenship. When should you stand up and protest against something that you think is unjust? We teach children to speak out. And if they can do that, they may be able to stop the ugly process of an escalation of human rights that could lead to genocide. Isn't that what we're trying? And I know he said that too, when you were introducing the whole topic. This is what we have to do. And we have to make sure that the Holodomor, as the case study, fits that grade, and it does. So this is very important. Next. And content. Well, obviously you have to have content when you're teaching. What we've done in our organization is we have prepared a pamphlet with basic information on the Holodomor. I gave it to the teachers already, but I have some more here, and I hope you will pick one up. Because we have a Holodomor Memorial Day, we have prepared a lovely little brochure. This is for the 85th. We do this every year. We prepare basic information about the Holodomor inside. We have an announcement they can read on the PA in the schools. Then we have lists of films they could and where to find them. We have books. We have information on websites to approach if you're a teacher or a student wanting to find out information. On the back print material, I put my book on there already. We have information on the bus, how to contact it so it can come to your school. We had information about our new monument in Toronto, about the Holodomor. So anything, this kind of thing can be put on a teacher's bulletin board, right? And if they want to teach it, it's readily available. We send this out to the school boards electronically, as well as having some that are hard copies as well. So little things like that are very, very important to give out basic information. Of course, resources for, that's one of the things that I wanted to stress was this. Also, we have a website, and our website is education.holodomor.ca, very simple. And that's the half of the website for REC. The other half is research. You can look at the whole thing. But the point is, if you're providing that information, they should know about it and they can go to it. So that's very important. And of course, suggested lesson plans and projects for teachers so they can have an idea of how to deal with it. Next. Methodology. I'm a big person on methodology. I guess some people would say that, but that's my specialty. I wrote a book for Ukrainian back in 2003, Metodika викладання історії. For many years, after Ukraine became independent, in 1993, the World Congress of Ukrainians has an education committee, and I was asked to prepare a program for teaching teachers how to teach history, additional qualifications courses. So I did that, and I did it for 15 years, teaching in different oblasts. And during the summer months, after we finished regular school, we'd go off to Ukraine and teach. And out of all that, I did a lot of photocopying, translating things, writing things. Came this book. It's been published twice already. And I even got the HRIF. The HRIF is the recommendation from the Ministry of Education for it to be used for teacher training in Ukraine for history teachers, which they say is rare for somebody that's not from Ukraine. But anyway. So I'm very pleased with that. It says sold out, and they told me I do it again. I don't know whether I will, but it will be on our website so that it's easy for a person to look at it. And it has lots of examples of lessons from Ukrainian history, especially the periods of history that had been denied in Ukraine, because they had to rethink that history and reconstruct it. My approach to teaching is to make sure that the teacher is not going to be speaking for giving a lecture, as they often do in Ukraine. They're getting away from it. I've seen a lot of good progress. And that the children actually have an opportunity to analyze, synthesize, and reach their own conclusions. In other words, I'm a proponent of teaching critical thinking skills. That's my goal. And that's the goal of education in the West. Because we cannot teach all the information. There's too much. They have to learn how to find the information and then know how to use it and apply it to good use. So that basically a teacher is not a trainer, but a facilitator of the learning process. And you know what Lilia Hernevich said to me? She says, well, I can see, каже, 20% вчитель повинен говорити, а 80% дитина працює і та сама говорить. Now that is revolutionary, isn't it? Most teachers do a lot of talking. So it's just something to think about. Правда? Учитель не приборкувач, a trainer, a садівник. Правда? That's what we're trying to do. And it's a very positive process, and this is what Lilia Hernevich wants to bring in, which I'm very pleased with. Next. Activating students in the classroom. I've already said all these things. Next. And so the book was born. All right, next. The book itself, I just wanted to give you a few highlights from it, okay? I dedicated it to my parents. My parents, both of them survived the Holodomor. My father's from Kyiv and my mother's from Chernigivshchina. My mother was 11 years old at the time, and so she remembers things. She remembers what was happening in school, how children sometimes died in the classroom. Schools were closed after a while. She remembers how she saw a child being bludgeoned to death for stealing a cucumber in the field. You know, things like that. So little stories that she has given out. My father was 21 at the time. He was the son of a Kuryliw, kulak. And he was imprisoned at the age of 19 and sent to the notorious Soviet concentration camp, Holodomor, where he said he got us an education because a lot of our intellectuals were there and they died like flies building this terrible canal up north. And he was released just when the Holodomor, the escalation, which started at the end of the summer of 1932. And my family, that I didn't know anything about these details, when I took my father to Ukraine in 1991, I believe it was. Yes, it was 91. They all got together and then I heard the story. If it wasn't for Ivan, my father, all of them would have died of starvation. He was the one that had a trade, and even when he came out of the camps, he ended up being needed for the Industrial Revolution in the Soviet Union. He earned money and he was able to get bread and bring it to the village. So it's an interesting story too. Now the second one is to the millions of innocent people who lost their voice. And James Mace. Anybody know something about James Mace? Special man. Yeah, he's a historian. He's half Cherokee and half American, as they say, true American. He worked with Robert Conquest on the commission on the Holodomor, and he ended up traveling to Ukraine and opening up the wound of the Holodomor to the Ukrainian people. I heard that they were putting up a monument for him. So I thought, I met him a couple of times when I was in Ukraine, and I thought it was that he died quite suddenly and still as a young man. And so I thought it would be nice to give him some recognition. Next. This is part one. My book consists of 4 parts. Part one is an introduction. You can see what I've done is I have a painting, usually a painting as one of the ones that I found that I thought would be good to illustrate. And then it's basically about the resource, what is the Holodomor, why study it, and the curriculum connections in part one. Next. And that's what is the Holodomor. Just very briefly, very concise, very simplistic, but very exact. Does anybody recognize the monument? Edmonton, 1983. The oldest monument in Canada, some people say in the world. That I can't verify. I have no idea. But this is the Militantes. And that was done in 1983. That's right.
What is the symbology there?
Well, it's the broken
Millstone.
disc That's right, with the hands of the dying or the starving. That's symbolic. So she tells me. But it's in a prominent place in Edmonton. Next. Why study the Holodomor? I had a gentleman over here started talking to you about it. Well, I have 10 major reasons for it. And this is the kind of stuff that can be taken to politicians if you're visiting. Some of them are very generic. They talk about genocide and human rights, and others are very specific about the Holodomor. So I use this quite often when we deal with politicians. Next. The second part deals with learning resources. As you can see, background information, and so forth. I'll show you. This, by the way, this painting is Mother of the Year, 1933. That's a painting. Yeah. Next. I also included a timeline. Some people don't want to read a long narrative. So in teaching history, I used to always put timelines. I had the kids make the timelines, so that you can figure out what came first, what came second. This way you can figure out what's going to be happening, right? So basically, I've done the same thing with it. I start with World War I and I end in 1948 with the UN Convention coming in. So that's important. And I tried to put in some pictures, as you can see. When you write a book, you have to be very careful with pictures. A lot of pictures of the Holodomor that were used in a lot of films and in various books, not all of them, but enough of them came from the 1921 famine. And anybody who wants to negate the Holodomor uses that you're using false things. Переборщуєте, таке не було, this is 1921, so be very, very careful. On our website, the pictures have all been verified. So if you want to know which ones are real, you should go on our website or go to the National Museum, the Memorial to the Holodomor in Kyiv. They have a website and they have an English version as well. Because you have to have them verified. It's very, very important. It took me a long time to do that. But it's something that is important. Next. Just another one. And I don't know if you recognize Genocidal. No. That's Raphael Lemkin. Raphael Lemkin is the father of the term genocide, if you know. And he also spoke about the Ukrainian genocide as a classic example of a genocide. And he has this four-pronged theory about that too. So I wanted to put him in here as well. Next. And my designer wanted to do some interesting things, so she did this. So how many people died in any day? This is the latest statistic, because they keep on changing. 28,000 a day, as you can see, the little people up there. 1,167 per hour, and 19 per minute. And I also included, as a teacher, you have to try to teach children from something they're familiar with to something that's new. And all kids learn about the battles of World War I, and this is the Battle of Verdun. So, and this is considered to be a bloody battle, okay? So take a look at the numbers compared to what was happening during the Holodomor in June of 1933, right? So this is important. Next. I've also included a number of maps. This is a very interesting one. This is the Map-Up project. It's from Harvard University. They have they've taken the data of the Holodomor and they've put it into graphs and maps. This one is very simplistic. It's the direct famine losses in Ukraine by each region. The oblasts were different at that time. Can you tell which area has the highest rate of death? What can you say from this?
I think we can make a conclusion that the regions which had the most proportion of Ukrainian population living in were like the most prone to Ukrainians on the east and in Chernihiv and Dnipropetrovsk areas, whereas Poltava and Kiev governances, as they were called in the Russian Empire and for quite a bit in the...
Well, Poltava's not part of the ones that had a lot.
Yeah, but it's the Slobozhenщina area, right?
Yeah, Kharkiv and Kyivshchina, the oblasts were different. This is where the greatest number is. And this is the wheat belt, where you would assume would be the greatest losses, right? Just last year, the demographers and the historians have concluded the reason for that. When they started talking about it, during the Russian Revolution, during the time of Ukrainian independence, when there was a lot of opposition to the Soviets and the Bolsheviks, etc., in Ukraine, this was the area, the greatest opposition. This was the area when they had bunte. I don't know, there hasn't been a lot written about all the uprisings during the Holodomor. When I was young, I used to ask my mother, well, she was a child, she didn't know about any of this. There is a historian, Lyudmila Hrinevich, in Kyiv, who's one of the top, along with Kuryliw. And she has written 4 books on the Holodomor, and one of them is about the opposition. And this is the belt where all that happened. So it's interesting that a lot of the, do you know about the Chorny Doski? The blacklisting of villages.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, blacklisting of villages. Villages that didn't carry out their quota of grain. What they did was they came into the village with troops and they took all their food, their pumpkins, everything out, surrounded the village with troops so that nobody could get out to leave to get food, and they left them to starve. 1/3 of all the villages in Ukraine were blacklisted like that. And guess what? This area, that was blacklisted. And that's where the nationalna частина была. So you're right in some respects. But the Russian population in Ukraine, from what I talked to historians about that, when we think about Donbass and all the other areas, we think that there were so many Russians. They came after the Second World War. They said they brought them into the mines, not before that. Because a lot of people felt that, maybe they brought them in during the Holodomor. They brought a few in, but most of them apparently went back. When they found out what had happened, they didn't want to live there. And these were supposed to be volunteers, so they took off. So that was a theory that was destroyed by the historians recently.
Do you have
Okay?
similar maps for Kuwait and other Ukrainian ethnic
Unfortunately, they didn't do Kuwait.
areas? And Crimea?
Yeah. Well, Crimea was not part of Ukraine at that time.
Well, it was
And neither was Kuwait. That's right.
debatably ethnically mostly.
Yeah, they have, but they haven't, they did it on this area, that was Ukraine at the time. Next. Recognition. We're talking about recognition, how proud we are as Canadians, right? Look how many countries have recognized the famine as an act of genocide or atrocity. Only 24. And Portugal was the last one. I was thrilled this year in hearing about 22 states in the United States that recognized it. So I phoned my friend Lana Babi in Connecticut. I said, Lana, wonderful. I said, it's about time. She said, don't be happy. I said, why not? She said, they recognized it for this year, for the 85th. Every one of our resolutions in Canada says an annual recognition day will be held. They didn't do it. That means that every year you're going to have to go back and convince these people to do it again. That's terrible, isn't it? But it's a long process, and unfortunately, it's not over. We even have the United States. That's in there because they recognize it as an atrocity, just like the United Nations recognizes it as a terrible atrocity. But they haven't recognized it as a genocide as such. So we have a lot of work to do still. And I put the picture in here because doesn't that represent the right thing? when we commemorate, our children commemorate with it. That's my granddaughter anyway.
Israel doesn't recognize.
No, no,
But
they won't.
Ukraine recognizes.
That's right. Ukraine recognizes, Israel does not. That's right. Next. And I also have included a couple of famine testimonies. This is a Tatiana Pavlichko. I didn't put a lot. What I've done is I give examples of the kind of thing you can use in the classroom. So this is one. In my resource section, I have lists of websites where there are oral histories that can be used in the classroom too. So that's important. And of course, I've tried to put in some pictures that relate to what's going on with that little house. Next. What does this picture show you? What could you think about it?
Storing grain in there.
Yeah.
What
And
does
a
that
guard. Right. That speaks lots, doesn't it? Yeah. And this is, even though it says 1934, this is taken in 1933. Because I had to check that out. It says 1934, so I went to the experts in Ukraine. Apparently it's slated for delivery to Russia in 1934. And українці з того часу, вони вмирають, правда, but the grain is there. Things like this, or a testimony of my grandmother that I got in the middle of the night when I visited her. They had a distillery in Ichnya, or in Chernivtsi. And the distillery, of course, needs grain, right? So they have mounds of grain. And in that distillery, after they're finished distilling and fermenting, there's this chaff that is left. And my Baba told me, she said there was a huge pit, and they would dump all that stuff in there. People would line the pit, and then she said some of them fell in there and drowned. But she would go every day, dva vidra, you know how they carry them. She would go after coming from the kolhoz, she would go there, she would take that, she would wash it, she would dry it in the sun, and she would then grind it, and then put something else, weeds or whatever she could get, and that's how they survived, one of the reasons for survival. So, you know, little things like that. And lots of this grain sitting there, but nobody was allowed to touch. Next. Primary documents. Here's your law of the 5 stalks of grain. This is only an excerpt, but for kids, you're not going to give the whole thing, which could go on for pages. What you need is to give them the thing that matters, right? What is it that they are going to do? And so I've tried to encourage teachers and students, teacher tip. How do we use primary sources? Why are they important for teaching, right? So this is the kind of thing we do. And we've known that Danevich found me a caricature. And this is supposed to be a representation. If you can see, there's a guy hiding, there's the guy looking for him, right? The 5 stalks of grain. Next. Another source of information for teachers is literature. You probably know of books that have been written about the Holodomor, right? There are lots in Ukrainian, but not too many in English, but there are some. Some of them have been translated. And this is a story written by Marsha Skripuk. Did anybody know anything about Marsha?
She was a few years back at the school.
That's right. And she's an author. She writes for young adults or young children. Well, actually, high school, probably grade 6 to grade 12 books. She wrote, this comes out of a book called Kozar's Children, where she writes a lot of short stories. And this one is actually called The Rings. And it's about a story about a young boy who's left, the only one who survived in his family. And I took an excerpt and I put it in the book, but the whole story is in the back of the book in the appendix. So this is the kind of thing that could be given too, and with a good assignment, you can get all kinds of information about the Holodomor.
With their interest.
Yeah, well, absolutely. It's a human interest story.
Yeah.
Next, and here, sorry, if you could see, entire story and an assignment sheet so that the teacher knows it's an assignment sheet to go along with it. Next. The aftermath, also important. Just so I've got all kinds of topics in here that the teachers would be interested in, or just anybody wanting to learn. Some of the questions that come out, some of the after effects of what happened in Holodomor. How did they affect people? Do you know that there have been studies made on psychological and physical changes in people after genocide and famine? One of the things that I came across is diabetes is rampant. Well, I know Ukrainians like a lot of sugar, and they like sweets, so I always thought it was that. But apparently diabetes is one of the things that to be aware of. So the survivors, and for 3 generations at least, they know that that's happening. Interesting, isn't it? Next. Oh, and then all the resolutions, all the provinces, Canadian resolution is in there so that teachers can give it regardless of which province they're teaching in, right? And the one in English of the Verkhovna Rada declaring it as a genocide. So that's there. And I also included, you know, I had one of my young teachers who was working with me. I said, go through all the documents and things we've done and pick out the important names that were there so that we can explain who they are. So very simply, Robert Conquest, Durante, you know, you've got Gareth Jones, the new film is out. It's just been in Europe. There's a new film that's coming out called Mr. Jones.
Is that right?
About Gareth Jones and Walter Durante. That's right.
Do you have Malcolm Muggeridge?
Yes, I'm just showing you one page. It's in alphabetical order.
Oh.
And I also put in the glossary. Very simple. I didn't put a sheet here, but if you want to look, the books are there. Very simple explanations of what things are. So that could be used for students, it could be used for the general Joe public, you know. Next. Then we get to part 3. And in this one, we have lesson plans, class projects, assignments, student worksheets, rubrics. Something that a teacher could definitely use. Next. This is an art workshop. My friend, Kuryliw is a kindergarten teacher who is also an artist. And when I asked her to help me with Holodomor, she came out with an art workshop. And her kids did all kinds of wonderful things. She not only taught the Holodomor, very simplistically in her way, using lots of visuals, but she also taught them how to draw, the principles of art. And I have all that in the book too. Next. These are 2 of the pictures that the kids drew. That was some time ago, but it's still there. Very important. And she also wrote a poem that is in the book. Next. Analysis of a historical document. If you're going to give kids a historical document, you have to have focused questions. This is a skill that has to be acquired. Analysis is super important. Whether it's an article, we have to look for bias, we have to take a look at what kind of proof there is for what they say. And this is an analysis of that. So basically, this is for a grade 9 to 10. They would have to answer these questions, 10 questions, and then they would have to answer, these are very basic, and these are a little higher order of thinking. If it was for younger kids, like grades 7 and 8, they would only answer those. And then I have another sheet for grade 11 and 12 that has very heavy thinking, demanding critical thinking skills to do as well. Next. Working with documentaries. You shouldn't just look at a film. My kids never at school looked at a film without having an assignment sheet. There's a purpose. So here's one. If we're looking at something like the film Voices of Survivors that Ariadna Ofrimovich produced recently, based on the oral testimonies that we have at the Documentation Center in Toronto, you can have them look at the film and choose, let's say, 10 facts about the Holodomor. Can you pick it up? Pick out the information. Teachers shouldn't be giving that information. The children should be gleaning that information themselves, right? And then answer more questions. So all this kind of stuff is the kind of stuff that should be going on. The children should be taught to do that. Next. And the last section is the appendix. I have resources. This is my top picks, the top things that I would give. I was asked by a librarian from Columbia University, how come you chose these top picks? You know, I have another list. I said, you have it for academics, right? I said, I'm trying to give people the kind of materials that they need to teach it, or for just the ordinary person who wants to learn the basic facts, not necessarily an academic approach completely. So basically, these are some of the websites, and you can see, Natia, this is from the Edmonton Catholic School System. They produce some materials. That's our website. This is Manitoba on their website too, and others, where there will be lesson plans as well. And so that's it, ladies and gentlemen. This has been for me a labor of love, I guess. I put my heart and soul into this, or as much as I could of it. You know, it's a passion for me. I felt I had to do this. There was no way out of it for me. I grew up in a parish, I have to tell you. Nina and I were growing up together in Montreal in that parish. Every single person in that parish came from Skhidna Ukraina, Centralna Ukraina. Every single person lived through the Holodomor. Every single person had either been in a turma or a concentration camp. And we, as children, learned, you know, as young kids. My boogeyman in Germany was Stalin. Didn't have to talk about this or a monster or that. I mean, I was frightened of a man with a mustache because my mother said, "Він нищить тих дітей, як не знати що." You know, і тебе знищить, як будеш навчати. You know, that's all you need to be told, right? So this kind of stuff was, I think, we absorbed the information that was coming out. We heard our parents talking. My father and my surrogate grandfather, because, you know, we came out, only the parents came out, nobody had family. They used to talk about what was happening in Ukraine. I used to sit in the corner and listen. My father used to say, you know, I wanted to know. But the point is, it was almost by osmosis that it penetrated into our psyche. And I think that's very important. I think that parish is unique. It's Свята Покрова в Монреалі, Православна Церква. Small little church, but the kind of stuff that we did there and learned was unbelievable. And a lot of those people gave testimonies, which are now documented, thank God. Because all of these people, I was in the church yesterday and I did a little presentation for them. There was not one that I saw the elderly people, they're all gone. Pravda, you know, yeah. And what a sad thing, yeah. But anyway, that type of influence has a lot. I then decided to study history because I learned a little bit, but I didn't have enough answers. So I went to study history. I studied Eastern European history at McGill. And then I went to Teachers College and I wanted to teach. And because I knew the education system, I was in a position to understand the history curriculum, what they were teaching, and saw what was going on with other genocides, that it was time to do something. So that's important. And the other thing that's important is also that about 20 years ago, in the school system across Canada, they started emphasizing human rights abuse and genocide. So the time was right. Prior to that, they wouldn't have probably been as interested. But all of a sudden, it became popular to do this kind of stuff. And what were they teaching? The Holocaust. They weren't even teaching the Armenian at the beginning. But then eventually, somehow, you know, we started talking about inclusiveness, these buzzwords. You're in the capital city of Canada, you know all about that. Inclusiveness, equity, whatever the words, right? So now, we Ukrainians are saying inclusiveness, equity, right? We have a right to have some of our history taught too. And therefore, we should be standing up for it, right? And so we have a right to be there as well. And I think that's the message we have to spread. And I encourage all of you to get involved. Your president, he would like to have somebody representing education, Holodomor education here in this city as well. I would like to come and talk to your school boards, but I need to go with local people. I can't just say, I'm from Toronto, would you like to talk to me about Holodomor? Doesn't work that way. I need locals to come with me, right? I can be the expert, but I need locals to go and do this. So we're looking for people to help us out. And I think that's important. So thank you very much. Дякую за... Thank you for coming, number one, for being interested in this topic. Sometimes, you feel that you're like a lone wolf out there with a few people running around, but it's interesting to see, що ви в дійсності переживаєте це, і це будемо продовжувати. І в Україні продовжується, і тут треба продовжувати, правда? By the way, I have to tell you, it's going to be translated, the book, in Ukrainian and in French. I'm looking for a French translator. Good French translator, very important. I went to Montreal, didn't find anybody so far. But I had a letter, this should be interesting, from the Brazilian fathers in Kuryliw, in Brazil, Portuguese. They went on our website and they wrote me, we would like to translate into Portuguese a portion of your website. I said, wow, I didn't even ask them. They're trying to do it. I think that's wonderful. That's what we need. That's what we need. So spread the word and help whenever you can. And volunteer. Look at me, I started volunteering, now I'm doing all this.
That's what happens.
I know it does. But we all have something to add to this life, right? You need to have, everyone has talents that they can use. And I found what mine is, so everyone has to do this. So I'm open for questions.